I'm Nancy, and I celebrated my 47th birthday this year. Since our son left for college, our home has felt remarkably spacious with just my husband and me. Our custom-built, 5-bedroom house was meticulously planned to accommodate our child's lively presence, with a particular focus on creating space for him to roam freely. My cherished spot is the balcony, where I cultivate a variety of herbs such as chamomile, lavender, basil, rosemary, and mint. Among the herbs, I grow those with delightful fragrances and those that are edible. One of my favorite concoctions is a mojito with freshly picked mint, and my son adores the basil sauce made from our homegrown basil, a staple in the care packages I sent him. My husband insisted on a study, and he fashioned a spacious workspace next to a custom-made shelf, showcasing his extensive collection of books and video game software. During weekends, he immerses himself in his study, indulging in his favorite pastimes, with brief breaks for meals and bathroom visits. As for me, weekends are my time to binge-watch dramas and movies in the living room, tend to my home garden, and engage in activities I love. With the demanding days of raising children behind us, I savor this second phase of life to the fullest. On weekdays, both my husband and I work until late. The mortgage for our seemingly unaffordable dream house, which we meticulously paid off over the years, was mostly covered by my income. After leaving our 2-year-old son in daycare, I returned to work part-time and eventually transitioned to full-time employment as he became more independent. My job and my passion for home gardening are now my anchors. Unexpectedly, my husband dropped a bombshell: we're selling the house. I couldn't fathom the words as he revealed his decision to give our home to my brother's family, who have been cramped in a small apartment with 4 children. I was bewildered and hurt that such a significant decision was made without consulting me. Despite my confusion, my husband accused me of being heartless and not wanting to help family in need. The pressing question loomed: where were we going to live? Hearing such a crucial matter after the fact was overwhelming for me. Despite my growing anger, I managed to suppress my emotions and tried to express my opinion rationally to my husband. However, he bluntly questioned if I had a problem with it, asserting that he was the one providing for the family, and my role was merely to listen. This was the first time he had imposed his opinion on me so forcefully, revealing an unexpected chauvinistic side. 4 years ago, my husband's brother and his wife relied on us during a challenging time. They frequently visited, leaving their 4 elementary school-aged nephews under our care while they enjoyed their own time. Despite my husband's assurances to his brother, claiming we had plenty of space, he rarely took part in looking after the nephews. Locked away in his study, he avoided the responsibility, even installing a lock to keep others out. The nephews proved to be quite troublesome, constantly demanding to eat out and expressing dissatisfaction with home-cooked meals. Their perception of us, as relayed by the kids, suggested we were kind and willing to fulfill their every wish. Despite my repeated consultations with my husband, he seemed indifferent to their behavior. Eventually, my son and I decided to take on part-time jobs on weekends to escape the burden of caring for the nephews. Unsurprisingly, my husband, the only one with free time, evaded taking care of them, concocting excuses to decline his brother and sister-in-law's requests. Suddenly, out of the blue, my brother-in-law's family decided to move into our house. Stunned, I felt disoriented. The next day, they arrived, eager to explore the house they were about to claim. Even though their nephews were now in junior high school, their behavior hadn't changed. They enthusiastically entered the rooms intended to be theirs, proclaiming that the house was too spacious for just 2 people. Completely unaware of their plans until the previous day, I was taken aback by my brother-in-law's nonchalant attitude. On the contrary, my sister-in-law confidently strolled into the kitchen, behaving as if it were already her own home. She audaciously instructed, "Please make sure to have the house cleaned before you hand it over. It will be troublesome for us later if it's done poorly." I was utterly astounded by her sense of entitlement, as if she owned the house, leaving me speechless. Trying to subtly convey the ongoing mortgage on the house, I mentioned that there was still a financial commitment. However, my brother-in-law brushed it off with a smile, saying, "That's okay. When our eldest son enters high school next year, my wife will start working part-time. She can earn at least enough for the mortgage payment." Motivated by their conversation, I couldn't help but feel they were misinformed. I've been diligently covering the $1,400 monthly mortgage for our house from the beginning. As a pharmacist, I have a decent income, but sustaining these payments is still challenging. In contrast, my husband informed me that my brother-in-law's monthly income is approximately $1,500. It seemed reckless for them to consider covering a $1,400 mortgage with just a $1,500 income. Interestingly, my brother-in-law and his wife mistakenly assumed that I work as a pharmacy sales clerk with a lower salary. They seemed to underestimate the significance of the mortgage. In a casual conversation, my husband, attempting to hide his insecurities about his wife's higher income, spread the notion that I do something akin to office work at the loan company. Upon hearing about the possibility of both my brother-in-law and his wife working, they seemed to believe they could manage the mortgage on their own. As this idea crossed my mind, my brother-in-law abruptly inquired about the monthly loan amount for the house. The smile vanished from my husband's face, indicating he was unaware of the exact monthly payment. Without hesitation, I revealed that the monthly loan payment was $1,400. Upon hearing this figure, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law froze, and my sister-in-law muttered, "You are joking, right? $1,400? I assured them that it was not a joke, explaining that we had not made a down payment, and therefore the monthly payment covered both the land and the building. My sister-in-law turned pale, expressing disbelief that they could afford such a sum. Realizing that they couldn't handle the mortgage, I thought the conversation would end. However, my brother-in-law started yelling at my husband, accusing him of not disclosing this information earlier and questioning if they were expected to cover the full amount. My husband, flustered, quietly asked me about the prepayments, revealing he had only paid 2 months' worth during bonus periods twice a year. With 17 years still left on the 38-year loan, the situation became more complex. While I silently prayed for them to back off, my husband made an unexpected declaration that we would continue to pay the loan. Stunned and pale, I couldn't comprehend his decision. In contrast, my brother-in-law and his wife were overjoyed, praising my husband for his generosity. I couldn't hold back my protest, questioning why we had to take on such a burden. My husband, sticking to his usual stance, argued that helping family in times of trouble was natural. Dumbfounded and disheartened, I fell silent, unable to comprehend his shallowness. My brother-in-law and his wife, relieved by my husband's proposal, resumed their house tour, planning to move in at the beginning of next month. I sensed my husband contemplating making me handle all the necessary changes, and I reached the limit of my anger that night. I reached out to my son, currently living away, and detailed the events of the day. I conveyed that I had reached my breaking point, and he chuckled on the phone, saying, "It's good that you finally decided to stand up to them. You should do anything you desire, even if it leads to divorce." "You'll be absolutely fine, Mom." Encouraged by my son's words, I resolved to teach my self-centered husband and lawless brother-in-law and his wife a lesson. When my husband rashly decided to give the house to his brother-in-law and his wife, I immediately went to the bank where I had signed the mortgage to discuss my decision. In fact, upon hearing from my husband, I had already conducted my own research on changing the name on the mortgage. I discovered that it was fundamentally impossible to alter the mortgage to the names of my brother-in-law and his wife. Changes in mortgage names are typically limited to spouses or parents and children. In cases like this, involving a name change between relatives, it becomes a bit complicated. Being the registered owner of the house, I could potentially hide the relationship with my brother-in-law and his wife and change the name. However, if the bank later discovered this, they might demand the immediate repayment of the entire remaining mortgage for breach of contract. While my husband, unaware of this high-risk situation, planned to give our house away without a second thought, I focused on work and house chores until the handover day, doing nothing. My husband, growing impatient, confronted me one day when a large number of cardboard boxes arrived at our house. I had handled the paperwork for the move and secured a new apartment for us. I stayed silent as he complained about my irresponsibility and selfishness, threatening divorce if I didn't start packing immediately. I continued to ignore him, and the next day he forcefully handed me divorce papers, claiming he was serious and would forgive me if I started packing. I was astonished by his unexpected action, but silently accepted the divorce papers, signed and stamped them without hesitation, and handed them back to my husband. To my surprise, my husband started visibly panicking, asking if I was joking and insisting it was all a jest. I knew he wasn't serious about the divorce, and I couldn't be with someone who treated such a significant matter as a joke, even in jest. I abandoned those words, leaving the already completed divorce papers on the table as I exited the living room. My husband, taken aback by my abruptness, fell into a stunned silence. "Wait, I'm sorry," I interjected. "I don't want a divorce. I want to live with you forever." My husband, tearfully apologetic, expressed his understanding, but I remained firm. I wasn't leaving this house, and I wasn't changing my name. "Let's live together here forever," I urged, and my husband seemed to grasp my sentiments, albeit disappointedly remarking that he couldn't tell his brother it was too late. Unfazed, I assured him. "It's okay, leave it to me." I lightly tapped his shoulder, offering comfort. The day to hand over the house finally arrived. My brother-in-law, along with his wife, brought furniture and luggage borrowed from an acquaintance. Their children were at school, and it was a weekday. As they stood confidently at the entrance, ready to claim their new home without mortgage payments, I intervened. "Sorry, but there are conditions you need to accept if you want this house," I declared, presenting the mortgage document. I asserted that they couldn't change the name on the mortgage, and if they still wanted to live there, they had to pay off the remaining loan amount in a lump sum. My assertiveness made my brother-in-law recoil, but my sister-in-law defiantly retorted, insisting that I was interfering and that the house belonged to them. I reiterated my position, displaying the documents that proved the house was in my name. She was surprised and half-threatened, suggesting she would involve the police. Undeterred, I stood my ground, expressing my willingness to be seen as heartless. I urged them to stop relying on us and start living independently. I escorted them into the house, closed the front door, and securely locked it. Despite their initial commotion, the neighbors seemed to have persuaded them to leave. Shortly after their departure, my husband received a call from his brother, who explained their predicament. They had already sold their old apartment and needed a place to stay. My husband, glancing at me, firmly declined their request, revealing a side of him I hadn't seen before. I couldn't suppress my laughter at the thought. If my brother-in-law's family moved into our house, they'd probably stay indefinitely. It became painfully evident, and my husband, desperate to avoid divorce, reluctantly obeyed me. From that day forward, my brother-in-law bombarded my husband with calls, and sometimes my sister-in-law would cry on the phone. Despite their persistent pleas, my husband consistently refused. I started feeling a twinge of sympathy for them. They seemed financially strained, and it was heartbreaking for their nephews. My husband, glancing at me, hinted at my lack of mercy. That's when I suggested, "What about the apartment we're planning to move into? Let them stay there." It was as if my husband had forgotten about it. Excitedly, he called his brother, and a few days later, they moved into the apartment he had contracted for. Just when I thought the ordeal was over, another crisis unfolded. My husband's brother and his wife weren't paying the rent. Despite months of me covering it, they hadn't transferred a penny. I anticipated this outcome when I suggested subletting the apartment to my husband. He was easily manipulated, and I sarcastically remarked, "Since you're not cold-hearted like me, you'll surely help them, won't you?" My husband remained silent, unable to respond. The brother-in-law's family, struggling to make ends meet, downsized to a smaller 1 LDK room. While I sympathized with my nephews, I believed it was a valuable lesson for a couple used to getting their way. I eagerly awaited the inevitable explosion of stress for my brother-in-law and his wife. I harbored no sympathy for them and had no intention of offering help. Since then, the brother-in-law and his wife incessantly asked for money, and my husband, maintaining a facade, ended up accumulating a substantial debt. Fortunately, we didn't have a joint savings account. Despite their unrepentant behavior, I focused on my happy life, indulging in gardening and harvesting herbs for my son when he visited.